So I'm at the JOLT conference in Hamamatsu, Japan, and I'm with Diane, Hawley, Nagatomo. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for asking me to be here.
Okay. So could you tell us a bit about your background in teaching, first of all?
Okay, well, I came to Japan in 1979, and I thought I would come here for just a year and learn perfect Japanese and then go back to my real world back in the States. But then somehow I didn't learn perfect Japanese in that year, and then I just stayed, and I didn't have any real plans what I was going to do here, but I got a job teaching eikaiwa at some conversation school, and then I moved right into like a business college, and I liked teaching English, and I liked Japan, and I just ended up staying longer and longer, and in 1984, I started working part-time at Tamagawa University, and I worked there for, I think, 4 years, and I took a year off maternity leave to give birth to my second child, and very, luckily, maybe this has never happened to anyone else, in the middle of my maternity leave, they called me up and asked me if I wanted to come back with tenure, and I didn't even have a graduate degree at that point. So in 1988, then I started working full-time at Tamagawa University, where I stayed until 95, and then I moved to my current place at Ochanamizu University.
Okay.
And it's a national women's university.
I see. Okay. So recently you've been, well, not recently, but you published a book last year, which I think you have on the table next to you.
Yes, I do. This is my book, Exploring Japanese University English Teachers' Professional Identity. And it's actually the publication of my PhD research that I started in 2005 at Macquarie University. And I finished in kind of record speed in 5 years. And what I was researching, I was interested in looking at how Japanese university English teachers, Japanese teachers who usually have backgrounds in literature or linguistics, how they kind of transition or identify as English language teachers. Because they are trained in something completely different. In many cases, they are doing something different from what they were trained to do.
So why did you choose that topic?
Well, when I started, thinking about doing a PhD, I didn't really have any clear idea of what I wanted to do, and I was half even thinking of Moodle at that point, or something. I really didn't have any clear idea. But one day I was in the copy room of our department, and one of my former students was there, and she was currently a PhD student, and our university sends, PhD students to other universities as hijoking part-time teachers. They get, introduced for jobs like that. So I asked her, I said, how's the teaching going? And she's just like, oh my God, it's really hard. They put on makeup in class. They don't pay attention. They, sleep. They don't do their homework. It's really tough. And I'm thinking, but that's what most students in Japan are kind of like. At my school, it's a really high academic school, and the students are very, very industrious, and they really work hard at anything you tell them to do. So I realized that university teachers come from an academic elite background where they probably, because Japanese education, you're streamed into certain areas of education at a very early age, and so from junior high or even possibly high school, you're surrounded by people with a similar academic ability as you. So if you go to a high-level academic school, everyone is going to be, good at reading, good at writing, and if they come to a national university, they have to be, have high scores in all of the subjects to pass the center exam. But so you finish with this degree, and you've been surrounded your whole life, if you go through the Japanese system, and you get a job at, blooming flower Tandai, where girls are majoring in, stewardess etiquette, but they probably can never even get a job at an airlines. They're, going to have this huge gap of what they have been spending their whole lives doing as students and researchers to suddenly what they have to do. So I wanted to look at that gap.
We should probably explain what a Tandai is. It's
I'm sorry. It's a junior college.
Yeah, it's a 2-year college.
It's a 2-year college for girls. It used to be very popular. It used to be the main mode of education for Japanese female students because as we know, in Japan, there aren't that many opportunities for women in business, but most women do join the workforce for a short period of time after they graduate from college, and they often are employed by a company through some recommendation system of their schools, not necessarily to work hard, but it's kind of like a bridal referral system. They get the right kind of girls. The girls work there, make tea, meet a guy, get married, quit, and then there's, constant bridal force being funneled in. So girls used to quit work by 25 at the latest. That was the kind of desired marriageable age. So if you went to a Tandai and you graduated at 20, you had 5 years of work that the company would get their investment out of you. But if you went to a 4-year university, you'd only have 2 or 3 years. So it was more cost effective. Parents knew that. They didn't want to spend the money to send to 4 years. But that was, since the 1990s, the number of these 2-year colleges have decreased, and many of them turned into 4-year colleges.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess we could say that's a positive.
It's a positive move, and also they're trying to make education more attractive for female students. Not necessarily for better career prospects, but I think it's the way to save the universities from all going bankrupt.
I suppose they're kind of equivalent to a finishing school, you could say.
Some of them, yeah. But, it depends. There's some very competitive 2-year schools to get into that are hard to get into, and companies want to hire the graduates from these schools. Even with the junior colleges and any college, the higher level school you go to, the better job you can get. And if it's a finishing school, if you go to a good school, and even if your parents want you to just get married, if you get to this company, you get a better husband, than this one. So that's the kind of mentality that shapes Japanese women's education.
Well, we'll lead on to that issue later, but so your research was into identities, and not male or female identities, but just Japanese teachers of English.
Well, I started off, wanting to look at new teachers.
Yes.
And so the people, I started interviewing a lot of different teachers. Well, first I wanted to do a questionnaire survey, and I constructed this, ambitious survey, which looking back now, I think, that was a big mistake. And I sent it to about 400 teachers, Japanese teachers, to every English department in Japan. I found a website, and I combed, all the email addresses of everyone I could find, and I sent out 400 questionnaire surveys, and I got about 10 answers. And then I realized, okay, this is not gonna work. It was a good preliminary survey, but what it did tell me is probably people didn't answer. Maybe they were too busy to answer my ambitious questionnaire survey. But another reason I think they didn't answer is they thought, well, I'm not really an English teacher. I'm a linguistic specialist. So there could have been that. So then I went to interviews but that was hard to find people to have the time to be interviewed because I was following a kind of interview protocol where I was going to do 3 90-minute interviews. And in some cases I could do that, but in other cases didn't have the time, or I was interviewing in different parts of Japan and didn't have the ability to go back, in 3 weeks later for the second interview. So then I narrowed it down to teachers that are relatively new to teaching. And I thought they're kind of an important group to research because they are products of the old system. You know, they went to college when it was the peak of the second wave of baby boomers. So when they went to college, it was the most competitive to enter. And at that time, I mean, it was really even good prospects for getting jobs. Maybe that was kind of ending at that point. It was also the beginning of the time when people had the chance to study abroad. You know, before that, not so many people did. So, well, actually, that was one of my studies, not the whole thing. And then they're joining university teaching at a time when all these new systems are in place. And they have to do community outreach, they have to go to high schools, and they have to do a lot more administrative tasks that the older professors didn't have to do. So I thought this is a good target group. That was one of the studies in my book. And it just was kind of by chance. I only had one male participant in the whole thing because I didn't have anyone else fit into that category.
Well, is that by chance, or is that because there would be more female language graduates?
Well, there may be more female language graduates, but the number of female professors in Japan is a total is only 14%. So that means 65% or 75% is male. So I think it was just by chance. Because I had to ask people, do you know somebody? Can you introduce someone? So it was not, I didn't get a real
gender balance.
Yeah, it was just kind of by chance, and I wasn't really looking for a gender balance, but I would have liked to have had, more male professors for my study. The one with the new teachers, I had I think 4 teachers in that study. I had one male teacher who's teaching at a fairly low level, I think it's a coeducational private school in a major metropolitan area. And then there was a female teacher who teaches at a fairly high level, not the top, but a fairly high level school in the big metropolitan area. One in a regional part of Japan, and a part-time teacher in a regional part of Japan. And the reason why I can't say even the prefectures is because there are so few female teachers in Japan that even if I just say the name of the prefecture, the person who spoke to me very honestly might be identifiable. If the male teacher, I could say prefecture and he wouldn't be identifiable. But there's so few female teachers that I was really careful to protect their identity. And I got 2 tenure track teachers. One was 2 teachers with tenure. One is a tenure track. She's on a contract, but it's not a limited contract. She has to be promoted to be tenured. And a part-time teacher.
Okay. And so what were your findings, broadly speaking?
Well, for that study, I used Wenger's community of practice theory as a way of analyzing, and it's been a while since I've looked at that chapter, so I've kind of forgotten. But I found that teachers that identify as language teachers are generally those that like teaching to begin with. My male participant, his major was education, and he kind of fell into language teaching by accident because he was a graduate student in the education department, and he had a year abroad. And on that year abroad, he couldn't take a degree or anything, but he took all the classes to get like a TESOL MA. So he didn't officially get the MA because it wasn't through the exchange program of his university, but he took all those classes to be an English teacher, just because that's what he wanted to do on his year abroad. So when he came back, then he had this kind of knowledge that really helped him get job. And also, every one of these teachers are graduates of excellent universities.
Okay.
So that's what really counts.
Yeah.
And I found that teachers they identify in different ways. One of my teachers, in the book, her name is Miwa, and she's in all three of the studies in my book. She identifies as a literature nerd. And she doesn't think of herself as a language teacher at all. She's a new teacher, so by now, maybe her identification has changed because she's gotten more experience. So I'm only talking about a slice of time, which is immortalized, for this person. But, so her identification as a person who just loves to read literature, that was even bigger than her identity as a scholar, because she just likes books so much.
I suppose that's kind of reflected, maybe the self-identification, to some extent, it may be that language teachers, or purely language teachers, are not necessarily seen as academics, and a lot of people in Japan will come to language teaching, as you said, through literature or through linguistics or through the study of an academic discipline. So that has a bit more cachet, a bit more kudos, a bit more kind of respect.
I think it does.
Yeah.
I really think it does. I think in the many years ago, because English speakers were so rare, that it was given a really high status thing. But now English speakers are not so uncommon, and it's viewed more like being technicians rather than academics. But even native English speakers kind of are identifying in the same way, because if they want to get ahead in a Japanese university or even maybe in the States, they have to pick some kind of academic thing to give an appearance of this.
Yeah.
And like the participants, they don't want to just teach only language. They want to teach like critical thinking, or my female participants, they want to teach their students about women's issues, about possibilities. And my participant Miwa, she didn't want students to just learn casual conversation, because she thought that would just lead them to become secretaries. She said secretaries, but what she really meant was office ladies.
Yes.
And she wants them to be more empowered by what they study. So for her, that empowerment is deep thinking about language and deep thinking about what you're reading and connecting it to your lives. As a language teacher, she was not that successful from what I observed in her classes. But her motivations, when you talk to her and you see the motivations, that her motivations make sense, because only being able to order in a restaurant isn't going to be that useful to most students, but neither is reading the living daylights out of 5 sentences. So there's this kind of gap.
Well, I suppose we do have a responsibility. If I say we, university teachers, there should be a distinction between what you study at university and what you would study in an English conversation school, for example. I think both have value, of course, but there should also be a difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think in this, in academics, in universities, I think that's a problem across all of the subjects. When you have to take, say, introductory physics, the person who's your teacher has probably studied something I wouldn't even know how to pronounce. So I think that is a problem, and in most cases, I think that's why a lot of university teaching is not very good, because people are not really trained to be teachers.
That would be the same in the UK system. I think you generally don't need to get a teaching qualification in order to teach at university.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, in elementary school and middle school and so on, you would need educational qualification. So this study, as I mentioned, it wasn't gender specific, but you led...
What happened is, because of my PhD research, we had to do 3 studies at Macquarie University. So I had all this data, and I did have some data from older teachers with more experience, but I didn't quite know what to do with it. And then I started, reading the narratives, and I had, in the end, I had like 500 pages of interview transcripts.
Wow.
And then I started looking at what the women were saying, and I realized that what the women's stories were different from the men I interviewed. I had the one participant in my book, but I did interview a few other male teachers as well in the process. Their stories were so different, and how they kind of came into English to begin with, how the path towards being a university teacher, there were so many gendered issues involved, and the women, my female participants, ranged in age from their early 30s to the 60s. So I had, of these 7 women, I had like the older generation where, they went to school in the late 60s, early 70s, and Japan was an extremely conservative place. In those days, there were almost no foreigners anywhere in Japan. The middle generation, which is the ones that first left Japan to go study abroad, the beginning of opportunities, and then the kind of newish generation of, the newer generation. And I found that for the at least 4 of my participants, they were kind of pushed into English study by their families because the parents thought English was a better choice for them. The 2 older women, one of them was good at math and English, and she was debating, which should I study, math or English, math or English. Now, she's a very brilliant person in her regional part of Japan, where she went to the national university of that prefecture, and she thought, well, okay, the only job I can think of is to be a teacher. So, math teacher, English teacher. Then she thought, well, if I become a math teacher, I have to compete against male students. It's going to be hard to get a job. So she chose English. Actually, that was her own decision, not her parents. The other person, she wanted to major in Japanese literature because she liked reading. Her father, who was a Japanese high school teacher, told her, you should major in English because you can always make money at home teaching children. So that's another issue, that English is a good financial backup plan for students. And in the early 70s, and she also went to a very prestigious national university, not in her prefecture, but she came to Tokyo, which is also a very gendered thing. A lot of parents don't want to send their daughters away. And then the 2 middle people, one wanted to major in art, and her parents were like, no, you got to major in English, and you got to get a teaching license because that's going to be useful. And the other one, who has a very interesting background, she went to a low-level commercial high school in her regional part of Japan, and she wanted to become an actress. So she came up to Tokyo as a high school student, and this is a low-level school where the teachers used to hit the students, and there were fightings and things like that. And she came up to Tokyo and successfully auditioned for a theatrical troupe. She went back to her hometown, and her father and her uncles were so upset, and they said, you're just going to be a Ginza bar hostess if you do that. So then she thought, oh, well, okay, because, she couldn't really go against her parents' wishes. So she decided to go to college, and her parents said, well, you can go to college, but you can only go if you pass the entrance exam within commuting distance of the home, because we're not going to send you to Tokyo because you're a girl. You have to stay home. And she passed the entrance exam of one of the best private universities in her local area. Coming from a commercial high school, she became like the poster child star of the school. And she only spent a couple months studying for the exam. One of her, I think her history teacher, coached her every day before school on test-taking techniques. And then another one came from a rural fishing village where nobody goes to college, let alone girls. And she, managed to get herself into a very good private university in Tokyo. But she convinced her parents, she's the literature nerd, and she convinced her parents that she should come to Tokyo to study English language, not literature, but language, because she would be able to get a job afterwards. It would be, money well spent for them. So she entered the language department, but then took every single literature class she could find instead, because literature wouldn't be practical. Her parents would say, "You want to read books? You can stay home and read." So there was, that issue. In going to graduate school, the two older women went to graduate school after their marriages collapsed. They got married, did the Japanese thing, had kids, somehow got divorced. I don't know the details why, but they returned to school after that. And the oldest woman was so old when she went to graduate school, and it was such an unusual thing to convert being a housewife for 20 years into being a graduate school student, that there was even a write-up about her in the newspaper.
It's very unusual in Japan for people to go to university at an older age.
Nowadays it's not.
Less...
Nowadays it's not, but at that time it really was. And so their paths were later. The middle-aged people, and they're not middle-aged, but the middle-aged group, they quit their jobs to go abroad to study. And Japanese men don't usually do that. They get the lifetime employment system, and they stay forever. But there is a trend among Japanese women to try to reinvent themselves by studying abroad. Many cases, it's just a period of mental and sexual freedom to go abroad, and then they come back and they get married and do whatever. But for these women, they could convert that time abroad, come back and get either go into graduate school again or get better qualifications. But they, like the one whose parents made her get a teaching license, that actually really helped her in the end, even though she didn't want it at the time. So these are kind of gendered issues that wouldn't really influence men. And then, of course, now they work for universities, and they are in such a minority of where they are at. One of the women, when she joined the university, she was like one of 4 people out of a faculty of almost 100. And the other male professor who joined at the same time, he was invited to all the drinking parties and the after, evening events, and she was not. So he's being groomed to be in the inner circle of the school, but she's always going to be kind of an outsider. Now that, of course, is changing, but their experiences are very different.
Well, I suppose that leads us more generally onto what is the current situation within that context, because in The Language Teacher recently you published an article about women working in Japanese higher education. What kind of numbers are there, and what is the situation for them?
Well, it's not good. They're really underrepresented. My data that I know now, it's a little bit dated because the statistics I've been using are from 2005, and female faculty is only about 14.5%. And I can even give you like a little bit, like the number of part-time teachers in Japan in 2005, there's 162,000 part-time teachers, 40,000 are female. Okay, so that's a big gap. There's 20,000 assistant professors and only 5,000 female.
So it's generally about a quarter.
Yeah. Associate professors, there's 38,000 total, and 6,500 female. 64,000 professors, full professors, and 6,500 female. So if you take it all together, then out of 131,000 full-time faculty, only 16,000 are female, and that's just 14%.
Well, as you said in the article, I thought that one of the most telling sentences was near the end, that you mentioned this isn't just a problem for women, this is a problem for all of us.
Yeah.
So what can we do about it?
So
that's an enormous question.
Well, do about what? I mean,
how can we start fixing this?
Okay, well, there's a lot of things. I mean, one thing, and I'm only talking about Japanese women here, because foreign women have completely different experiences and entrance into things. Japanese girls often are not getting the kind of education from the beginning that would lead them into being in academia. Parents, I keep looking at the camera, parents feel like they want to spare their daughters from examination hell, so they send them to lesser level schools. They don't want their daughters to compete in the same way. So they often go to escalator schools from an early age. They often go to all-girls schools. They often don't want to send their daughters away.
We should say that escalator schools is often schools or universities, high schools, junior high schools, elementary schools, may all belong to the same group, so you can just move from one to the next.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are extremely competitive. If you go to like Keio or Waseda, the top private schools, it's really tough to get in, and it's hard to stay in. You know, they do weed out poor students. But many of those schools, by the time you go to high school, it's difficult to go to a high-level university. You have not received the kind of training. Although, like I said earlier, my participant managed to do that from a commercial high school. So they're not getting, pushed into the right direction. The attitudes that, women education is for cultural enrichment rather than for career building also limits people. But the Japanese government is really trying to take more concrete steps, and some of the top universities are trying to promote women academics. For example, Tokyo University took some really concrete measures to increase the number of female researchers. For example, because the biggest issue for Japanese women is really balancing career and family, and it's almost impossible to do both. I mean, as we know, Japanese men can't do it because they, can't. The system here is different. But what Tokyo University did is they stopped having meetings at night, required meetings. All the meetings are going to take place in the daytime so that it's not a huge burden on the female professors with children that, need to be picked up or whatever. They started paying more attention to safety procedures, for women, because if you're pregnant and you're working in a laboratory, these are things that have to be considered. And my university, it's an unusual university because it's the university that really promotes gender, and our motto is, female leaders. So we are trying to create a generation of leaders in Japan, and we do that by, promoting our students to go abroad to study science and things like that.
So I guess in some ways it seems to be a little bit of a positive outlook.
Well, that's, you'd think, but then if you look at the gender gap, the international gender gap, I can't remember what the statistic is, but Japan is like right almost at the bottom.
Yes, I show the statistics to my students, and they're absolutely awestruck.
Yeah, and when you think about, they measure 4 things. They measure women's education, women's health, participation in society, and I think participation in politics. And so they might be, the last 2 might be together. Well, we know Japanese women have the highest life expectancy in the world. So obviously the health thing, they're way up at the top. Education, now Japanese women are highly educated. And probably on an international standard, more Japanese women go to higher education, post-secondary education than any other country. But like I said, it's to build cultural capital than to build career capital. So to score so badly on the other, it means that they must be almost non-represented at all. Like, look at the new Prime Minister's cabinet. The women really are very invisible. And so it could be a positive outlook, but there's too many hurdles that need to be overcome. But I think education is the key. And that's why I think gender, and paying attention to gender and thinking about gender issues when we're language teachers is important, whether you're a male teacher or a female teacher, because our students are all mostly women in language lessons in
Yes.
language schools. It's, English is still considered a door opener for women, an empowering tool. So we have to kind of really,
Well, I guess that leads us on to your work with Gail. So in JOLT, in the organisation, we have special interest groups, and you are the coordinator.
I'm a co-coordinator with Fiona Kreeser.
Okay. With Gail. So
Yes.
tell us a bit about Gail.
Okay, well, GAIL stands for Gender Awareness in Language Education. And in 1995, at the JOLT conference in Nagoya, I was at the conference, but I didn't know about this dinner that a number of female teachers decided to get together and talk about JOLT and problems. And when you're living your life, you don't really notice all these things, but later you look back and you think, yes, that's how it was. At that time, JOLT's plenary speakers were almost only male. The main articles in journals were basically written by male teachers. And, there are a lot of reasons why this can be, not just, blatant, we're not going to let the women in kinds of things. It's all these subtle things that happen. But in 1995, they decided to form a group, support group to be, to help mentor women to become more active in JOLT, and also to provide more networking opportunities, because men are very good at that kind of thing. So first they started a group called WELL, which was Women Educators and Language Learners. And that's still going on. And
they have yearly conferences.
We have a yearly conference in Saitama, and it's a very good networking group, apart from JOLT. And some of the same people in WELL then worked hard to form GAIL, because WELL, it was only for women, but gender is not only a women's issue, it's it's an issue for humans. So they formed GAIL, and it became, I think, a special interest group officially in 2000. And I think 1998 was the year that the language teacher had a special issue of dealing with only gender. GAIL brought in some big names that are dealing with gender. So gender became a kind of open topic where it really wasn't before. And so I'm the co-coordinator, and we're trying to expand our work with GAIL and expand people's understanding of what is gender and what are gender issues. For example, like my new research project that I'm working on deals with foreign female teachers in Japan.
Yes.
And I have an article coming out in The Language Teacher early next year on housewives. And it's called something like the advantages and disadvantages for housewives in the cottage industry, eikaiwa business. So, and I look at the teaching at home and how the gender issues that are attached to that. And people wouldn't really, think about that as an important issue, but it is, especially for those people.
Well, we've got JOLT, and we have JOLT Junior here, and I think probably the vast majority of people working with children, especially on the Japanese side, would be women.
Yes.
So children's teaching is for women.
Yes.
And, academia is for men. Some
Absolutely.
may say, right? So.
Yeah. And that, the Japanese women that want to become language teachers and they start working for these companies and they start teaching, these children, it's very low paid and it's very demanding work.
Yes.
And, they've spent a lot of time because they have an idealized image of English and what they want to do, and they're not really, maybe they get more respect and satisfaction from it, but it's not well paid work at all.
No, not for the amount of work they do.
No.
Okay, well, if we could just change your hat for a moment. You're also here with materials writing, and you gave a presentation or workshop yesterday.
Yes.
About materials writing. So you're a textbook writer.
Yes. I'm crazy.
So, what advice would you have for anyone aspiring to write textbooks?
Well, I've written for the Japanese market, so, and that's like, if you were at the meeting, were you at the meeting yesterday?
No.
Okay, so at yesterday's panel, we only talked about writing for the Japanese market. So it's completely different from writing for Cambridge or Longman or Oxford. And the main users of Japanese textbooks are going to be the Japanese teachers.
Yes.
So in my research, of Japanese teachers, they have a completely different attitude towards language education. And it's not, I don't think that Western applied linguistics and Western way of doing things is necessarily appropriate or correct in all cases, because Japanese people don't need English. If it's used as an enrichment activity and a character building way, well, why not? But I think that the teachers deserve to have really good books to work from, and Japanese teachers, they. If you look at the cover of my book, I wanted to kind of show the image of, they're teaching, some classes, and the two of the books here are the books I actually wrote, but they're surrounded by their Shakespeare research materials. And, to get ahead in academia, you have to do your own research, and teaching sometimes takes a back seat. So I wanted to write, or I think we should write materials that are easy for teachers to use, so they don't have to spend a lot of time preparing. And it should be good, because as language educators ourselves, we want the students to benefit from the books. I mean, there's some dreadful books out there that some Japanese teachers have been using for the past 25 years because they've already made all the notes in the margins. So, like one textbook that one of our assistants had to use because the teacher had already ordered the text, and then the teacher got a different job somewhere else, so she came in. It was like the history of spices, and it was an entire book about spices. And
that's not something I would want to be using.
No, but she, she was happy. That was how she got her foot in the university teaching door. So, she taught about spices for a whole semester. Yeah. So, I want to have. So write something that the Japanese teachers would be useful for them and doable for them without a lot of, ambitious speaking activities, because many times Japanese teachers' classes have way too many students. And students are quite passive in many cases in Japanese teachers' classes, whereas they might muster up a little bit more enthusiasm if a Western teacher is entertaining them more. So, and, publishing companies, they want new materials, and they want good stuff. So you don't have to be shy about approaching them. And go to the conferences like JALT. And yesterday on the panel, that's how some of the people got their foot in the door. They just handed manuscripts. They put in a proposal to present at the conference, and they went to the publishers' booths, and they said, I'm doing a presentation, you want to come and see, and then you can see what kind of ideas I have. And that worked, So think outside the box of how to, and when the salespeople come to your schools, talk to them. Ask them what's selling, what kind of books do they need. Be friendly to the sales staff, because they have a lot of power.
Yes.
When I put in a book proposal last summer and it got rejected, and all the reasons why it got rejected, which was very, logical. I didn't pay attention to what I know. I just kind of got carried away. The sales staff said, well, this, we won't be able to sell it because of this, and, this and that. So the sales staff, they have a lot of power, because of course textbook companies want to make money. They're not in it for,
just for the love.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's some positive advice, I
Yeah.
think. So thank you very much for your time, Dan.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking about myself for a whole hour.